Okay, so welcome to this tutorial on just the basics of getting started in the PIXLR editor that's online. This is what we're going to be using for the class to edit photos and to do some other stuff with. If you haven't already gone onto the Moodle site and read the two articles, or at least looked over the two articles that explain the toolbar, which is over here, and then also explain just the basics of the PIXLR. This will just give you some frame of reference for what I'm going to show you today. All right, so I'm actually already logged in. You can see my name right here. When you actually go to this website, make sure editor is at the end because it will bring you right to this page. And this address is on the PDFs that I uploaded and also on the Moodle, okay? So you want to log in. You're going to create your login today. I also have directions on how to do that on the Moodle site. So make sure you create a username and a password that you remember, write it down. And then we're going to go ahead and get started. So here we have the platform. You can see our toolbar, which we can move around. And you can also see some other windows, navigator, layers, and history. So for our purposes today, just editing our photos that we took last time we were together, the scavenger hunt photos. You're just going to be doing some really quick edits to those today. So how you get started is you go to File, not New Image because it just opens up a blank window where you can bring images in. We're actually opening an existing image, so you go to Open Image. Now keep in mind that I'm working on a Mac, so it's going to look a little bit different from what you are looking at, but for the most part it's going to be the same. So when you go to open a photo, they're going to ask where you want to look for it. Mine's on my desktop, so I'm going to go Desktop and find my photo that I want to upload. And then it will pop right up here. Right away you can notice this picture takes up a lot of room. If you look down here, you can see we're actually at 100%, which is fine. But if you do want to change that just to see, to zoom out a little bit, you can change that number just by typing in right here. Or you can actually do it up in the navigator window. You can see how you can zoom in a little bit. So whatever makes you happy, you can do. You can also see that right away in our layers palette, we have the background and then that little view of the image. Don't worry too much about the layers palette right now. We'll move on to that with our next project. Just be aware that this is where it's at, and we'll talk more about that later. Also, the history palette is very important, and I'll talk about that a little bit today. But basically, to get started, what we're going to be doing is we have our photo here. You can move it around. It's in its own little window. So the more photos you open, you'll just basically have all these tabs that are on top of each other, kind of like when you're in a web browser, which is nice. What we're going to be concerned about mostly today is under these two tabs, the adjustment and the filter layers. So we're going to be doing just some really quick, simple edits to our photos that we took the last time we were together. You're going to be doing this in a group. However, you are watching this as an individual right now, but just so you both are on the same page of what you're doing. So starting in the adjustment file, you have some options here. A lot of these are pretty straightforward. A lot of these you may have heard before if you're familiar with Instagram and the like. So right away we have brightness and contrast. Brightness obviously is going to make your photo brighter or darker, depending on which way you move the toggle. And then the same with contrast. Contrast is how contrasting colors, or make it dull. There you go. So I'm going to edit mine just a little bit, make the contrast just a little bit up, and then I'm going to click OK. Now right away in the history palette over here, you can see how it actually added what I just did. So I opened my image, now I'm at brightness and contrast. This is really great because if you make a mistake or you want to go backwards in time, all you have to do is click back in your history and you can start right over. So you can see how I went back to open my image and the brightness and contrast disappeared. Okay. There's another way to do that if you want to step back. You can also go up to Edits and just go to Undo. And you can see right away for a lot of your options, you have shortcuts. So for example, on Undo, it's Control Z. So on your keyboard, you would hit Control Z and it would just step back in time to the last thing that you did. So you have a couple options to undo anything that you want. If you get more than about 20 or 30 steps that you want to go all the way back to, you might have to start over because it doesn't keep track of what you're doing. So the next thing we want to talk about is we have back in the adjustments palette. Hue and saturation. Hue is going to change the color, so the hue of your photo. You can see how right away it's changing a little bit. Depending on what you're going for, you can get kind of crazy with this, but it can add just kind of a nice filter almost to your colors. Saturation, or how saturated something is going to be how black and white it is, or how much color there is. So the more I bump it up, the stronger my color is going to be, and the more I go down, the black and white is going to be. There's actually an easier way to turn your photos black and white, which I'll show you in just a minute, but be aware that you do have the option to kind of play around with how much of that color you're taking away. So I'm going to bump down my saturation just a little bit, and then the lightness is kind of similar to the brightness, but you're actually affecting the colors. Okay, so then again, you can see my hue, saturation in the history palette. The next one we have down here, we have color balance and color vibrance. These are going to play around with just the red, green, and blues, and just the amount of color of those each colors that you're having. So green, the less green you have, the more purple you're going to have. So feel free to play around with these when you start uploading your photos, and be aware that they're there. Moving down into levels. Levels is also similar to color balance, but you're actually changing the intensity of the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights. So the shadows are going to be over here, and you can actually move these toggles. So you can see how I'm increasing the shadows in my picture. This one in the middle is going to be your midtones. So less midtones, more midtones. And then the one over on the side is going to be affecting your highlights. Okay, so you can see I'm increasing the highlights. Don't worry too much about the levels right now. We'll play around with this some more in some other projects, but just be aware that it is there. Same with curves. We'll talk a little bit about that later. Curves has more to do with tonal range, and again with the highlights and the shadows. Exposure is important because when something is overexposed, it means that there's too much light. It was exposed to the light for too long. So that's going to cause our picture to kind of look like this. It's going to be more washed out, a lot of lighter areas washed out. When there's not enough light, it's underexposed, and it's going to be pretty dark. So if you took a picture last time we were together that seems a little too light or too dark, you can play around with fixing that in the exposure. So you can move things around a little bit. Okay, so that's the exposure. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. Also an adjustment down below, you have some other options here that are just automatic adjustments to your picture. So things like inverting the colors, okay? So that's going to be on the extreme end of things. So I'm actually going to undo that. So go back in my history palette, back to color balance. We also have some other ones, solarizing, desaturate is taking all the saturation out, so black and white. Anytime something is desaturated, it's going to be in black and white. So that one's just a quick way to do that. And there's also a couple more that you can play around with, okay? Really quick here, the last one I want to talk about is over in the filter. So we have tons of filters. A lot of these you might be familiar with because of Instagram or any really simple photo editing applications on your phone or computer. So you have a couple options here. You can add noise, which adds kind of a grainy quality to your picture, okay? There's also some crazier ones. For example, this is adding a mimic HDRs, which makes things really, really sharp, which I'm going to go back to. And then we have some other ones like the Hope poster, if you are familiar with the Hope poster of Obama. Some fun filters. However, the thing with filters is don't go overboard on the filters. It's really easy to add too many filters and it just ends up being a mess. So my theory and my rule of thumb with filters is the more the better. If you can't tell that there's a filter when you've done a filter, you've done it right. So don't go too crazy. Depending on what you're going for, of course, if you're doing a poster, then maybe go a little bit crazier. But try to keep it, pretty simple. It starts to take away from kind of what you're going for if you get too nuts on these. So just be aware that those are there. We're talking about the layers and the adjustment. So that's what you're going to be using today to edit your photos. So watch my next video with how to save and turn in your work. Okay, so